Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where people are weird and we're kind of scared to let them read our writing a little bit. I'm Karen Peterson, joined as always by the amazing Lauren Humphries Brooks.
Hello.
How are you, Lauren?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, people are weird. I've for some reason this week, I've just been like, it's not so much that I disapprove of any of you. It's just that I think you need to examine yourselves a little bit.
A little bit, right?
Like, this is weird, guys. This is getting weird.
Well, before we get into that, how was your Thanksgiving?
My Thanksgiving was lovely. I got to, I'm still in New York for Thanksgiving. I decided not to go home. So I went over to a friend's place and it was just a few people. It was lovely. We had a really good time. They made great food. Like my friend made a cheesecake that's one of those, it's a burnt Basque cheesecake.
Ooh.
And so it's supposed to, well, it was weird because it's supposed to be burned on the top. Like you cook it at a really high temperature and so it burns on the top so you get a little bit of bitterness. Mm-hmm. And it didn't completely burn. And she was really upset. She's like, my cheesecake didn't burn, Lauren. I was like, and you know, like I looked at it and her roommate looked at her like, it looks like a cheesecake, so I think it's gonna be fine. She's like, but it didn't burn. And
it's
it was
not
delicious.
Ruined, so it's ruined.
And it was delicious, by the way. Like it was
awesome.
It was great. I honestly think it was one of those where she just maybe took it out of the oven a little too early or something. But it tasted so good. Like it was amazing. So yeah.
Nice. You know who would have had a perfectly burned cheesecake is Giuseppe.
Yes, he would have. He would have.
Anyway, yeah, I went to a friend's house and it was funny because they are Puerto Rican and Cuban, and they were calling me like a couple days before. So we're gonna have some, like, it's traditional for us, but it may not be traditional stuff for you. Is that gonna be okay? I'm like, yes, I'm so excited. And they're like, oh, okay, because we're not adventurous people. I'm like, oh, I am. So bring it on. So it was great. It was a lot of fun. So
that sounds lovely.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So, but yeah, going back to the whole people are weird thing. So what did, before like reviews and real information started coming out, what did you think Licorice Pizza was going to be about?
I mean, I will put a little disclaimer on this. I don't like Paul Thomas Anderson that much. I don't like, a few of his films I've enjoyed, but a lot of his films are just really, they're not for me. And so I wasn't paying too close attention to his new film. But what I kept on hearing was that, you know, it's like a coming of age story in the 1970s about like two young people who kind of become friends / get into a relationship. It sounded very like slice of life, sort of, you know, maybe a little bit light and nostalgic. And that's really all that I knew about it. And then I began reading reviews. And these are positive reviews, by the way. So I was like, oh, a lot of people really seem to like this film. You know, maybe this is going to be one of the Paul Thomas Anderson films I will actually want to see. And then I began reading. I was like, wait a minute, what? They're how old and how old? And it's like kind of, and everyone, the thing was, I haven't seen the film, but every positive review that I've read of it has like been like, oh, this is like a sort of burgeoning romance. And I'm like, yeah, but she's 25 and he's 15. That's problematic.
Mm-hmm. Like, this still would be a problem, but I could get more on board if he was maybe 17, like just about to turn 18. I'd still have problems with it, but I would be less less bothered by it. You know, like I remember commenting on that exact thing when Call Me by Your Name came out.
Yeah.
And I got called homophobic. I'm like, I don't have a problem with the fact that they're gay. I have a problem with the fact that Chalamet's character is 17 and the other guy is not. You know, like that's where my issue is. Like he's still technically a child. So but I would have felt a little, I don't know. There's definitely a difference between 15 and 17. I mean, this kid needs a chaperone for stuff, and she is his chaperone for things early on. And I know one of the excuses people have is like, oh, but it's fine because they never have sex. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't mean that this isn't a sexual movie, you know? And because it very much definitely is. Even when sex isn't part of the like equation, it still always is because there's the desire for it. You know, a 15-year-old boy who has a total crush on this girl isn't thinking about sleeping with her? Come on. Like, that's ridiculous.
Well, and that's what, like, everything that I've read about it, and I read your review, and I've read, like I said, I've read a lot of positive reviews. Everything that I've read, I'm just like, this is, it sounds like she doesn't really question it. And it's like, I'm sorry, there is, I have been a 15-year-old, and I've also been a 25-year-old. If at the age of 25, I was like, I have a thing for this 15-year-old boy, I would be like, there's something wrong with me. There is a problem that I need to get investigated, because that's not normal. It is not normal for a 25-year-old woman to have any sort of romantic feelings for a 15-year-old. Like, exactly. Period.
Yeah.
And I'm like, even struggling, just like, 15-year-old boys are gross. Right? You know, because they're like, they're teenagers, they're like children, they're sort of getting into being grown-ups, but not yet. And I, as a 25-year-old person, I would never have wanted to hang out with a 15-year-old. And I would be really concerned about any friend who did.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing. Like, there is one scene where she's questioning, like she's talking to her sister, and she's just like, do you think this is weird? And her sister says no. I'm like, yeah. What? It's fucking weird.
Even allowing for the time period, I really can't accept the idea that any grown woman, and at 25, you know, it's not even the age of 20, right? It's 25, right?
Yeah.
And I cannot accept the idea that any grown woman or other grown women around her would not look at that and be like, yeah, that's weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think one of the reasons that people look past it so easily is that not only I mean, she looks kind of young, although like in real life she's 28, 29 years old, you know, but they infantilize her character so much. She does not act like an adult woman. And not just because she still lives at home or because she like doesn't have a quote unquote real job or whatever, but just the way that she acts, the way that she talks about the world, she just comes across as extremely young and immature. And I think that's where people rationalize it, because they're just like, oh, well, Gary is so much more mature than his age, and she's so much younger than her age. So they kind of mentally meet in the middle, which is so backwards, because anybody who knows anything about people knows that women mature much faster than boys do, which is a whole thing. But anyway, yeah, so it was that. But what really, one of the things that really frustrated, oh, sorry, did you want to jump in and say something?
No, no, not really. I was just gonna say that, yeah, I agree with you that, and again, and you've seen the film, I haven't, so I'm coming at it just from things that I have read about it. And all of the praise that I've read about it, I've still just been like, no, like this, it sounds to me like a fantasy, like a male fantasy. And you mentioned in your review about this, like, you know, getting a crush on the babysitter kind of thing, that's what it reads like. And it's like, yeah, that's what it sounds like. And again, the thing with the crush on the babysitter is like, okay, it makes sense. You know, 15-year-old boy has a crush on a 25-year-old woman. Okay, I can absolutely understand that, right? The 25-year-old woman does not reciprocate. You don't go like, oh yeah, boy, you're totally hot. It's like, no, you're not. Like, you are a child.
Yeah, like, remember Adventures in Babysitting when Elizabeth Shue gets hired to babysit this little girl But her older brother, who's 15, has a crush on her, on the babysitter, and decides to stay home with him, and his friend comes over. She knows what's going on. She calls it out. Like, and she's only supposed to be 18 in that. So whatever. But anyway, I digress. It was really weird though, leading up to before I actually watched it. So many people were really excited about it. And I asked several friends, like, listen, I'm not a big Paul Thomas Anderson fan. And so, like, where are you at? People who are saying they loved him, like, do you just like love all of his movies or what? Oh, no, no, no. I'm not really a big fan either. This one just feels a little less like him. And I think you'll like it. And after I saw it, I was just like, what? Have I not been clear about who I am as a person that people thought I would like this movie? First, there's the age difference thing. There's other stuff that I don't even want to get into right now because it's spoilery. But there's also like blinding racism, like ridiculous and not even hidden at all. It's just right out there. And so it's stuff like that where I'm just like, I don't understand why people are not calling this out, why they're just accepting it so openly and not just like accepting it, but embracing it and loving it. And it's been very frustrating. And this is, I think, really what the crux of what we want to talk about with this conversation. But it's been really weird how I've had some other friends, not ones who said I would like it, people who actually said I probably wouldn't, who also saw it, also didn't like it, but aren't going around publicly saying so because they don't want to be attacked for not liking the movie.
Well, yeah, I think that that's what's getting increasingly weird. And, over the past week we had, and a lot of this is occurring right in a very bubble, right? So this is a film Twitter bubble.
Mm-hmm.
But these are a lot of the people that are talking like this, a lot of people that are a part of film Twitter are the ones who are writing the reviews, the people are reading, the people are going to Rotten Tomatoes to see, etc. And it's getting increasingly clear to me that they're just some weird people, or that they're people who are really unwilling to question even something that they like. And I think you can absolutely like something like Licorice Pizza or The Last Duel, etc., and still understand why other people would have issues with it.
Yeah.
And what is developed over many years on film Twitter, and I think many years just in film criticism generally, is this attitude of, if certain films you must like, otherwise you are morally and ethically bereft, and other films you must not like, otherwise you are morally and ethically bereft, right? Mm-hmm. It turns into this consensus that then if you depart from, or if you say, well, I liked bits of it but I have problems with other parts, etc., or if you just say, I really didn't like this and here's why, there is this like, you didn't get it, you're lying. I've even seen one of the first things that I realized that made me begin to go looking at the reviews of Licorice Pizza was another film critic mentioned the age difference and said like, this is really disturbing, and this, like, she was saying that it was basically grooming, that's what it looked like to her, whether or not that's accurate, etc. But immediately there were like 15 people who were just like, how dare you, this is a lie, like all of this stuff is like, wait a minute, what is she actually talking about here? And so I went and began reading reviews. I was like, oh, that's what she's talking about. Okay, like I can see how you would view it like that. And yeah, the attitudes, it's getting weirder and weirder. Like the whole Last Duel thing with, if you don't support this film, you're responsible for the death of cinema, and then expressing this absolute shock that mainstream audiences didn't go to see this movie in droves. It's like, I could give you a list as to why. Mm-hmm. Like, I can explain to you exactly why people didn't go see this movie. And then there's still that attitude of like, how dare you say that? It's like, no, I mean, I'm not drawing a conclusion about the film itself. I haven't seen the film. I know why I didn't go see it. And I can give you a list. We have a pandemic. It is a very problematic subject matter, regardless of who is dealing with it, regardless of, it's a difficult subject matter, period. It's a 2.5-hour film. it's being promoted on the basis of at least two male stars that people don't love that much anymore. And that definitely it is not like, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in a medieval film. You're kind of like, is this a Saturday Night Live skit? All of that, but just the sheer shock of like, oh my God, no one went to see this film. It means that cinema is dead. It's like, I'm 100% positive that's not the truth.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's weird. I mean, personally, I didn't think The Last Duel was well made either. I think there were a lot of problems with the filmmaking itself too. That's my own personal opinion. And Licorice Pizza, I think there are definitely things about it that I quite enjoyed. There are some really funny there were some really funny moments. There's some great like production design, that kind of thing. The cinematography, I have a problem with Paul Thomas Anderson as a cinematographer. Like, I hated the way Phantom Thread was lit, for example. But this, it's like it kind of worked because it made it feel a little bit dreamy, like a comedy. I think I said this in my review, like a combination of sort of like this dreaminess and also this home movie element to it. So there are things about the movie that are great. And so I understand why people like it. I wish those folks would understand why I don't. And that's what is so weird and so frustrating. And when I wake up on a Saturday morning, the day after I published a review, and I'm afraid because I see how many views it's had, there's something really wrong with what's happening with the state of film criticism today. And the fact that I have friends who can't openly talk about how they don't love the movie, and the fact that like just me saying, you know what, I didn't really like this. And it's not just Licorice Pizza. There are other, like, look at the response I got to Tick, Tick, Boom. I haven't even talked about my feelings on Spencer, really, because I know how people react to this stuff. And it's so ridiculous and so unfair and so counterintuitive to the point of film criticism. Criticism does not mean like, I'm just, I don't know. We've talked about this a lot. We've talked about this a lot recently. The fact that we just can't have honest conversations about stuff and back and forth. You and I sometimes disagree on movies and we have great conversations about it. But there's none of that out in like the film Twitter world. It's getting less and less like that, just even off of film Twitter, just in circles with other film critics. It's like, I know people, it's like, I'll just sit down like, oh, so what'd you think of this? Oh, I hated that. And then that's it. End of conversation. It's like, oh, well, I quite enjoyed that movie. I'd love to talk more about our thoughts, but clearly you don't want to do that. So, okay, I'll just go back to my bubble then. You stay in yours.
Yeah, there is this attitude among a lot of film critics that, that they don't really want to criticize film. They don't actually, like, they're not interested in critiquing film. They're really interested just in saying like, I either loved it or I hated it. And as I've said before, a lot of the time my reaction to film is I liked parts of it and I think other parts could have been done better, and sometimes that results in me kind of coming down more on I really loved it and more on I really didn't like it. But a lot of the time it's somewhere in the middle, right? And there's no such thing as a perfect film. Like that just doesn't exist, right? There are definitely films that speak to you more as an individual. And there are definitely films I think that should be critiqued and need to be critiqued because they're presenting really problematic things. But we need to be able to have respect for people. This actually kind of brings up one of the things that was said yesterday that I think was really good. This is from a tweet from Jessica Ellis at Baddest Mamma Jamma. And it's a good thread. We'll try to link the thread in the show notes. But she says, it seems like film culture is less about enjoying movies and more about beating them, figuring out their surprises ahead of time, attacking them for every possible logistical flaw, like you were in competition with the filmmaker to prove who is superior. And that's a really good kind of encapsulation of, I think, one of the issues that we're talking about here. That there is this attitude of like, and I had a brief conversation with her, and one of the things I said was that, well, it's like there are a number of critics who seem to believe that film is an equation, right? And that you can solve a film, you can come out with the correct answer. And usually the correct answer is it is good or it is bad. And if what you come out with is it kind of works in some places and it kind of works in other places, no, that's not allowed, right? It's a failure. And I think that she makes a really good point that there's this attitude that we're fighting with the film almost, that we're trying to solve we're trying to find the solution to it. And the solution is it is good, it is not good. And that critics, and that's increasingly the truth. And some of this might be a result of the binary, this idea that has kind of been propagated by Rotten Tomatoes, but even before that, by people like Siskel and Ebert, who were doing thumbs up, thumbs down. And usually they were a lot more nuanced in that, but it comes down to, it is either fresh or it is rotten. It is either thumbs up or it is thumbs down, one or the other, right? And of course, and of course we know that it's not that easy.
Yeah, I kind of think the binary resulted from this kind of thinking rather than the other way around. I don't think the binary caused this. I think it stemmed from it.
I mean, there's definitely a sympathetic relationship between the two.
Yeah,
I think is what's happening. But Rotten Tomatoes in particular has kind of encoded it, basically.
Oh yeah, because one of the problems with Rotten Tomatoes is that they have like the aggregated score, not just this percentage of critics say this movie is good, but they actually have like, and here's the average score of this movie was like 7.5 or whatever. But they've made that so much less accessible. Like it's really hard to find it now, what that score is. And it's never been the thing that they like put out, because the percentage is so much easier to market. Like, it's 96%. And then people go, 96%. Wow, this must be amazing. And it's like, no, it just means that out of 100 critics, only 4 didn't like it. That's all that means. Doesn't mean that it's an A+ movie.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I have found, like, I was going through some of my Rotten Tomatoes reviews, and I was like, man, I give a lot of fresh ratings.
Yeah.
And I was looking through them, and I was like, well, the reason for that is that a lot of the time, I don't want to be unfair to the film.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, on par, did you like this movie? Yes. Okay, then it's going to be fresh. Right. And that tends to be what I ask myself. But then, and there are certain films that I'm like, okay, on par, I really disliked this film.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be rotten. But I'm way more likely to give a fresh rating simply because I'm like, I don't want to discourage people from, and I don't think that my single review is going to make that difference. But I don't want to be someone who's discouraging people from going to experience a film, even when it is imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm much more likely to be like, this is good.
Yeah.
Right. Than I am to say that this is bad, unless it's like something that I truly despised.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more liberal with my rottens than you are, because I'm just like, no, this movie isn't worth your time. There's better things to watch. That's kind of my criteria. So like, I definitely, when I was at award circuit, we were on a 4-star rating scale and we could do halves. So for me, the cutoff was like 2 would be rotten and 2.5 would be fresh for me. Because then it's like, okay, if I'm giving something a 2.5, that means it's got a lot of problems, but it's still like, there's still something about it that, it's either it's charming or it's funny or whatever. If it's a 2, that means like, it wasn't a total disaster, but it's pretty bad and just don't bother with it. That was kind of where my personal cutoff was. But.
Well, and that's the problem. And, and we know
everyone does it differently.
Yeah, everyone does it differently. Everyone has a different like attitude towards it. I am much more like, well, I enjoyed it. So.
And that's why that aggregated score is so much more important than the percentage, but also so much less sexy for marketing.
Yes. And that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, my humble plea today is that if someone doesn't like a movie that you like, have a conversation about it. Don't attack them or say that they're stupid or wrong, or vice versa. If they like it and you don't, like, we're allowed to like whatever we want. Everybody's tastes are different and they're informed by so many different things in our life experiences and our understanding and our education and all of that. And it's okay for people to have different opinions. It's not okay to not accept other people's opinions and to just invalidate them just because it's not what you agree with.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Sounds like a lie to me, but all right. Sounds fake. Accepting other people's opinions.
Right. I mean, geez, what's next? Feminism. All right.
Dogs and cats living together.
Mass hysteria. We don't want mass hysteria.
We don't. I'm gonna put the cat back in the bag.
Well, it's hard to put the cat in the bag because it's already out of the bag.
We're gonna shove that goddamn cat back into the goddamn bag.
Don't be like the mayor from Jaws.
Never compare me to the Jaws mayor. Never. Anyways, this has been brought to you by Ghostbusters. Answer the call. As always.
Lauren does wear big earrings. Anyway.
If it's a crime to look good.
Consider me guilty as charged. Yeah. So that's fun. Let's just do that for the next hour.
Just people go back and forth, yeah.
Yeah, people won't hate it at all.
No.
No, but let's see. So this is the last week end of November, which means it's the end of Noirvember. And so last week we did jump into Ghostbusters because that was the hot topic of conversation. And thankfully the percentage in Rotten Tomatoes dropped on that movie, so it became okay to not like it. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But so we were going to do this conversation last week, but we decided to move things around. So today we would like to talk a little bit about, like, wrapping up our Noirvember series. We would like to talk about gender and how gender roles and gender tropes are used in film noir. So we want to spend the bulk of this conversation on women, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about masculinity in film noir, how it's typically portrayed and how it is also attacked sometimes. So Lauren, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things I wanted to address, and it was, this is nothing new about film noir, but that a lot of noir is post-war films, right? It's particularly in the late 40s and into the early 50s. That tends to be about where a lot of noir films fall. And we've got to remember that noir is not really a genre; it's a aesthetic, basically, and it involves certain plot points and everything. But one of the interesting things I think about noir in terms of a post-war context is that a lot of the time you've got men returning from war and basically being unable to fit into the society. And part of that is because of a lot of unacknowledged trauma. And you've got to remember that World War II, the concept, there were concepts of shell shock, there were concepts of like psychological problems leading off of usually physical injuries, but just psychological problems as a result of being in war, right? And this was for both men and women, but particularly addressed in terms of men. But there wasn't a deep understanding of like PTSD or anything like that. There wasn't a lot of work being done on that. But so what we see, I think, in a lot of film noirs is men who are basically traumatized and don't know what to do with their lives, and don't know how to fit back into their society because they've been engaged in a lot of violence. They've been very often celebrated for violence. And they're returning to a world where obviously they're not supposed to be violent anymore. And they're disturbed, they're distressed, and they don't really know where they're supposed to fit into that. And this is clearest, I think, when you begin to talk about there are a lot of film noirs that actually make reference to the protagonist's war record, and the fact that he was in the Air Force, he was in the Navy, he was in the Army. they often meet up with other men who were, members of their units. And I think one of the most obvious ones is the Blue Dahlia with Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. And there's a character in that, and all of the male characters in that are actually either veterans who have returned from war, or men who have managed to evade the draft, evade going to war. But there's a character in that who literally has, I believe he has like a metal plate in his head, and he was injured and he forgets, he blacks out, and he does things that he then can't remember. So, and this becomes an issue of his characterization, and particularly when he has these episodes, he becomes violent usually. And so there's this implicit understanding throughout the film of him as not really being responsible for his own behavior, and of being traumatized, and of not having much of a support network to protect him, and to help him through, the fact that he's essentially, blacking out. So I think that in the representation of a lot of masculinity throughout film noirs, you're talking about a generation of men who have been traumatized. You talk about a generation of women who have been traumatized, but a lot of it is very focused on men. And kind of, rather than, coming back and going into your steady 9-to-5 jobs, are either unable to go into those sorts of jobs, or are unwilling to. They cannot fit into that society in the way that society wants them to, so they become criminals. And that's something that runs throughout a lot of particularly post-war noir, obviously. And it's about this performance of masculinity, this performance of violence. The only place that men who have been sort of conditioned to violence could go to in a post-war era is either criminality, or remain in the army, or become cops. And so you get a lot of protagonists that fit into one of those categories throughout film noir.
I mean, that's still a reality today too. So many guys come home from their military service, and it's like they really can't assimilate because of the experiences that they've had, and they also struggle to find jobs within their skill sets, and so they end up becoming cops. And so we have a militarized police force.
Well, and I think it's interesting in terms of World War II, because there's less of a recognition of that in a certain sense. There's not really a social recognition that these are traumatized men who don't know how to do things anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And we have a little bit more recognition of that. We're not doing great with it, but we do recognize it. But so it's interesting to see in these noirs that this kind of tacit understanding that there's an entire generation of men who don't fit into the society they're supposed to fit into, and they don't know how to cope with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you get the guy who just drinks a lot and whatever, because that's the only way that they know how to cope. And it's interesting the way that we have glamorized World War II so much, and continue to do so, even though we see more. I remember watching Saving Private Ryan for the first time, and that was the first time that I really had, not that it was the first time it had been done, but the first time that I'd really seen a movie actually show that, wait, this was war and it was horrible. It wasn't something glamorous and just, exciting. It was war. These guys they came home. If they came home, they were a mess because of the trauma that they'd been through. And I think part of the reason that it was easy to, but because of the way that they were depicted in these movies, where it's like you say, there's this understanding that that's sort of what's going on beneath the surface, but it's never really addressed. And so if you're not paying attention to it and you don't understand the between the lines or the nuances or whatever, it's easy to just think, oh, well, this guy was a war hero, or now he just doesn't like people, or whatever the case may be.
Well, and one of the interesting films I think that I recently saw that does that actually addresses it more head on than a lot of films do, is on the Fox Noir collection on Criterion Channel, and it's called Somewhere in the Night. Mm-hmm. And the story is about a shell-shocked veteran who comes home, and it's one of those, he has amnesia, right? He cannot remember who he is. And so the film is about him trying to figure out who he was before the war. And he gets like involved in all of these sort of shady characters, and of course meets a beautiful woman who like immediately falls in love with him, all of that. But one of the interesting things I think it does do is that as he's kind of going through this, he begins to discover that maybe he wasn't the best guy. And it's sort of an interesting kind of psychological allegory for sort of him trying to both deal with a past that he legitimately does not know what his past is, right? But it's something that he did. And so he's having to deal with that, and also trying to accept who he was and who he wants to be and who he becomes. And it's a really interesting film for that. I think it's overlong, it has other problems, and it does have this like amnesia aspect to it, which is, as we know, is kind of silly. But it's actually dealing with war trauma in a very interesting way, because it's essentially him coming back and being like, I don't know who I am. Outside of being like, all he can remember is his existence as a soldier. And he's having to figure out who he was before that and what that means, and whether or not he can change, and whether or not he needs to change. So it is a fascinating film in a lot of ways. And I think it's one of the few films that actually does address this issue of really extreme trauma and remaking himself after the war.
That sounds interesting. I'll have to check that out. The Fox Noir collection is pretty good. I just found it the other day because I have not been I've been so busy that I haven't had a lot of time to dive into Criterion this month. And the other day I was scrolling through looking for just anything to watch, and I'm trying to remember what I ended up watching after all. But yeah, so then I found it and I was like, oh man, I wish I'd known this was here sooner.
No, it's a really good collection, and a lot of lesser known noirs in there also, which is nice to see. But I think that a lot of the films that are on there and that are available on Criterion Channel do sort of highlight this issue of violence, and of, there's a lot in noir, there's a lot of angry men, and there's a lot of violent men, and men sort of expressing emotion in really the only way that is socially acceptable, which is through violence. And it's interesting to look at that in terms of World War II, and to kind of understand like this actually makes very good sense. It's this disaffection, it's this inability to kind of be a part of polite society, basically, because you've gone through a situation where there are people who are trying to kill you, right? Yeah. And when you're coming back into a world, what is the sort of civilian concept of that? Well, the civilian concept is cops and robbers, basically. Mm-hmm. So there's a very much like, the cops are trying, I'm a thief, the cops are trying to kill me. I am a cop, the thieves are trying to kill me, period. It's as close as we can get to something that looks the same as war.
Yeah, that's true. That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's contrast that with how women are depicted in noir.
Everything is in crisis, I think, in noir films. Masculinity, femininity, everything.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think we've talked a lot about the femme fatale, and we talked about that a number of times on the podcast, and I think that we also need to talk about kind of her opposite number. So the femme fatale is, she's the dangerous woman, she's the sexual woman, she's very often punished in the end, but she is this sort of kind of preview of women's liberation. And the woman, again, like a lot of the male characters, the woman who doesn't fit into polite society, who's dangerous, who's sexual, who kind of does what she wants to do, and very often either won't get married or has affairs with multiple men, etc. So is very much freer in her sexuality, and is kind of pushing back against a lot of the patriarchal norms and patriarchal control and everything. And then you have her opposite number, which is very much the whore virgin dichotomy. Her opposite number, who's the good girl, right? And there's always, and a lot of noir, not always, but a lot of noir has this sort of girl Friday character who is sweet and kind of represents the home and hearth sort of element, and she often offers that to the male protagonist of like, you know, you can come home and be safe and secure in this sort of suburban world. And often that doesn't work out, right? But she is, you know, often not sexualized at all. If she has a sexuality, it's very subsumed, and it's very much tied to being a wife and a mother. And she's the nice girl, the girl that you take home to mom, basically. And so you still get that kind of dichotomy. I think one of the interesting things is when those elements get closer and closer together. And I've recently seen a number of films that kind of take the good girl gone bad kind of idea and actually explore it. And one of the best ones that I've seen recently is the Blue Gardenia, which is directed by Fritz Lang, actually, who we talked about. And this is basically a girl played by Anne Baxter, who gets dumped by her boyfriend and is very upset and decides, you know, fuck it, I'm just going to go out and have a good time because I'm sad and my boyfriend just dumped me. So she goes out, she meets up with... Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, like, her friends she lives with two other women, and her friends are encouraging her. They're like, go out, like, do something. Don't just sit at home waiting for this guy who might not ever come back to you. Like, go and do something. And so she's like, okay, fine, I'm going to go and do something. What happens is she meets up with Raymond Burr, who is a total gigolo and like keeps on buying her drinks. She gets drunk. They wind up going back to his apartment, and he attacks her. By the end of it, he has attacked her, and she kills him, or she thinks she's killed him. And she's really drunk. She wanders out. She gets home, and most of the film is about like the next day his body is discovered. And most of the film is about her trying to conceal the crime and conceal her involvement in it. Because of course, you know, there's all this like, well, he brought a girl home, so of course, you know, she must have been this loose woman who murdered him, you know, all of that kind of thing. And so it develops into this really interesting, very very time, you know, very period centric, right? It's very much of its time. But it develops into this really interesting story about her sense of guilt and her fear and all of the fears that are connected to that it isn't just about, you know, he attacked me and I killed him, but, you know, that she at some level would be thought to deserve it because she went out and got drunk and went home with the guy, right? Well, what did she expect? That kind of thing. So that victim blaming element to it. And the fascinating thing I think about the film is that it makes use of those concepts. It makes use of those tropes and sort of points out that it's not really her fault, right? She made a mistake. She shouldn't have gone home with them. But also he shouldn't have attacked her. And, you know, the fact that he's been killed is kind of his fault. He should not have been, you know, forcing her to defend herself, basically. So yeah, you get a lot of films. There are a number of films that are like that about like I say, the good girl gone bad, the good girl who does something, you know, goes out and has alcohol or gets involved with the wrong kind of man.
Heaven forbid.
Well, and one of the things that I like about a number of these films is that despite their time period, despite the fact that this is kind of the subject, they do sort of highlight the hypocrisy of that. Mm-hmm. That like, yeah, like her friends are like, girl, go out, like do something, you know, get drunk, meet up with a dude, make out with someone, don't just sit here being sad. Right. And and what she does, the worst thing that she does is that she makes a mistake, she gets drunk, and she goes home with the wrong guy, right? None of which means that she should be culpable for murder, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or attempted rape.
Right. Well, so one that I saw this week that was actually part of that Fox Noir collection, that I think is a little bit related to what you're talking about. It's a bit different, but that's Black Widow.
So many gender issues in that film. Yes, let's
Oh,
talk
yes,
about it.
let's do. But so, I mean, the protagonist in that movie is man, but it's about a woman who has been missing or murdered. She's not missing; she's very dead. But she's kind of that young ingenue who wants to be a writer and wants to break her way into show business in New York, and she's kind of, she's this like fresh-faced girl, and so she's very easy to underestimate, I guess, or just assume that she, is kind of this, you just have these assumptions about who she is and what her life is like. And then after she is murdered, then you start unraveling pieces, and she's having an affair, she's pregnant with some married guy's baby, it's like all these things start to come out about her. And then so it's like her as the murder victim takes on a totally different view than if she really had just been that like precious ingenue and virginal girl that you kind of think she's going to be at the beginning.
Yeah, I really liked that film in a lot of ways, and it's complicated, and it's complicated in terms of its representation of women and of femininity and what is okay to do, what isn't okay to do. But all of this is talking about women having to navigate very male dominated spaces, very patriarchal spaces. And I don't want to say that just men are enforcing this. A lot of it is enforced by other women.
Yeah.
And trying,
patriarchy could not exist without women as gatekeepers.
Yeah, exactly. And as moral voices, right? As
Yeah.
the ones being like, determining who is the good girl, who is the bad girl, who is too sexual, who is not sexual enough, all of that kind of gradations. But so it's a lot of women struggling to fit into those places. And in terms of what we were, talking about earlier about the post-war kind of relationships, is that you've got a whole bunch of women, right, who are becoming more independent, who are no longer solely about, going for their MRS, right?
Right.
And who want to be writers, who want to be actresses and singers and all these things. And on the one hand, it's often presented as being very dangerous and very, like really she should be happy to just stay at home and cook for a man. But there's also this pushing back against all of those narratives. And that's what is happening, I think, in a lot of ways in Black Widow, is that you've got this young woman who is very young. I think she's supposed to be like 20 years old or something like that. She's just come to New York, right? And she's trying to navigate this space where everybody has the potential to prey on her. Everybody has the potential to use her. And she gets wrapped up in things, some of which are of her own making and some of which aren't, that, are kind of her trying to figure out where her place is. And she's ultimately murdered for it.
Yeah. And the solution to her murder is pretty interesting. It was one where I was like, I kind of saw that coming, but it kind of didn't. And I thought, this is where it's going, but also maybe it's not where it's going. Like it's very clever, and I hope that people will watch it because it's really interesting. And then just seeing the way the female characters in that movie are presented and the way that they interact with each other is very it's really interesting the way that it's done. And I think that it really says a lot, like we were just talking about, it says a lot about the way that women do kind of set the expectations for what is acceptable, what is proper, and what is allowed.
Well, it's all of those gender relationships that really do sort of limit everybody, right? that, you know, you have to be really careful not to go home with a man. You have to be careful not to do anything that could be misconstrued.
Right.
Right. And
it wasn't even just that it was dangerous, it was that you didn't want people to get the wrong idea.
Yeah, even if it's totally innocent. And one of the things that, and I don't think this is really spoiling it, that some of her relationship with the Van Heflin character, right, it's an innocent relationship.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, and it gets odder and odder as the film goes on, but it is this innocent relationship. So you're kind of like, well, really, this should be allowed. Like, you should be allowed to be friends with men.
Mm-hmm.
Married men, not married men, etc. But you're kind of like, well, if he was married, it's not okay, and if he's not married, it's not okay. So there's no winning, basically.
Right. Well, and also just the fact that he's surprised that anybody's thinking anything, and that he doesn't understand how their relationship is coming across or will be interpreted. It's pretty interesting.
Well, and it goes back to that thing of women as gatekeepers, right? The women all understand.
Right.
The women all know how the relationship is going to be interpreted, whether or not they necessarily believe it, right? And because, and part of that is because the women are the gatekeepers, and also because they are the ones who know that they have to protect themselves.
Yeah.
They know what other women will say about them. And they're having to navigate these spaces as well. And it is one of those films that I think really lays bare the very thin lines that people have to walk in that society. And that still do in a lot of ways. And one of the disturbing things about some of these films is that we're still having some of the same conversations.
Yeah.
Right. There's still those attitudes of like slut shaming of, you know, if you dress the wrong way, if you know, well, why were you walking down that street? Why were you wearing that skirt? Why did you go out and get drunk? All of those
Why
things.
did you go to his apartment? What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah, exactly. And on the one hand, you're kind of like, yeah, these are spaces that women have to navigate. And we do ask ourselves those questions. We do say, like, I shouldn't go and do this because it might be misunderstood. It might be misinterpreted. It might put me in a position of danger. And on the other hand, you're like, this is stupid. I should be allowed to go out and have a drink.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, another film that I just watched, which you have not seen, which also oddly is about show business, is The Velvet Touch. And I was surprised that you haven't seen that one, because I just assumed that you would have. But
this is one, I've never even heard of it. This one has missed me completely.
Wow. Well, it's on TCM right now, so it's not on Criterion or HBO or whatever, but it's basically, so Rosalind Russell, she plays this big stage star, like big Broadway star, and you know, her whole career is centered around this director producer, and like they basically made each other. And she's trying to get out. She wants to go do something else. She wants to expand her horizon. She wants to like go do film or something. And I think there's a very specific project she's trying to get onto. And he's just like, no, you're nothing without me. You can't go. I'm not going to let this happen. They get into this fight, and she ends up really accidentally killing him. And that's all in the very opening, like, of the movie. So that's not anything that's a spoiler, but like, that's the crux of what gets this going. But what ends up happening then is like, there are no witnesses to it. She's wearing gloves, so she doesn't leave any fingerprints or anything. And no one would ever suspect that it's her. And so she's dealing with this like guilt over this crime, which was really not even a crime of passion. It was really more of an accident. By today's standards. She definitely did not mean to do it. But also, like, no one would understand that, right? And so she's trying to navigate that. She obviously doesn't want to get caught and go to jail, but she's also racked with guilt over what happened. And watching the way that she is treated because of who she is, because of her status, and then watching the way some other people, including some other folks who end up becoming the suspects in this case, It's another one where it's just like this really interesting dynamic of power and gender, and I can't believe you haven't seen this movie. You need to see it.
I after that description, I do want to see it. It's interesting that there are a number of these noirs that are about women being victimized or accidentally murdering men, and then needing to figure out how to conceal it and how to navigate that, and having different reasons for doing that as well.
Yeah.
And because like a lot of noir, we're so used to seeing them as being psychological investigations of men. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. But it's interesting when you get these more female-centric noirs, usually that are written by and directed by men. Although the Blue Gardenia was actually written by a woman, it's based on a book by a woman, and you can tell. I'm telling you right now, you're like, this is a woman. I was even Googling it. I was like, yep, woman wrote the screenplay.
You can always tell.
But to like really that digging into the female psychology, and it isn't just about psychology, it's obviously about the society that they're having to navigate, and what they know they can get away with in society and what they can't.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the films that I want to reference in reference to that is The Accused, which I wrote about. The recently came out on Blu-ray from Kino, and is a really fascinating film in a lot of ways. And this one is another one. Basically, Loretta Young plays a psychology professor who gets after kind of going out to sort of talk with one of her students, who's a very disturbed young man, he winds up trying to assault her, and she fights him off and kills him. And so most of the film is about her covering up the crime, and then trying to sort of work her way through the fact that she's murdered this young man, and the fact that more and more people are beginning to suspect her involvement. It's a heavily psychological film, because a lot of the film is about the men analyzing what sort of a woman would kill him. And so they begin, and so her terror is that they're going to basically figure out that she's the only one who could have done it, via psychology, not even really via physical evidence. And so it turns into, and there are a lot of scenes in this film where it's basically Loretta Young being talked at by a whole bunch of men, and essentially beating them at every turn because she's smarter than they are. And even at a certain point, a lot, at least two of them are beginning to really suspect, just like, you killed him, like you did it. And she just has all of these answers for it, and she's able to talk her way around it. But it's this fascinating kind of examination of trauma and of her experience of trauma. And the way that the film presents it is that this was there was not a choice. Like, he was attacking her. It was basically either she lets him rape her or she kills him. That was really the only two options that she had. And so she hits him hard enough that, with I forget exactly what she uses, but it's pretty brutal actually for a film from 1949. And so the audience sympathy is pretty much always with her. And the audience sympathy is with her all the way through, even when she's being interrogated, and you begin to get this feeling of like, they're really bullying her. They really don't understand why anyone would commit this crime, even though they know that this guy like preys on women. There's all of this talk, just like, well, he was a really brilliant young man, but he's a very promising young man, but he had issues with women. And it's just like, yeah, you think? Like, he attacked his professor.
That sounds good. I've never watched that one.
It's very good. I don't know if it's available for streaming anywhere yet.
It is not.
The Kino Blu-ray is really beautiful, but it's worth seeing, I think, for Loretta Young's performance. She is fantastic in it. And just for kind of this, it's very cultural. It's very like specific to its culture. Definitely problematic in places, but a really fascinating and very, I think, sympathetic and empathetic view of this kind of a crime.
Interesting. It's funny because as you were describing it, like there were things about it that reminded me a lot of watching The Velvet Touch. So I'd be
Well,
very curious for you to watch that and then compare them.
there seems to be this sort of subgenre of women committing crimes that then they have to cover up, and again, where the audience sympathy is very much with them.
Because it's not really a crime. It's like you said, self-defense
Act of
or
self-defense, yeah.
yeah, or just an accident, which Velvet Touch is kind of a little bit of both, sort of. But yeah, it's interesting. Are there any others you wanted to mention?
Well, just in terms of the psychology, one of the films that I think is really fascinating, and I still don't know what to make of it, is The Dark Mirror with Olivia de Havilland. And this is the film where Olivia de Havilland plays twins, one of whom probably committed a murder, the other of whom did not. But one of them has an alibi, and the other one won't break her alibis. So they are like identical, right? And so the whole story is basically a psychiatrist trying to figure out which one of them would be capable of murder. And it's interesting. It's very pop psychology. Like it's one of those where like he shows them ink blots and he's like, you're the crazy one. But it's really interesting for Olivia de Havilland's performance because she is like, there are a number of scenes where she's basically talking to herself. But also in her portrayal of these two very different women who both are Olivia de Havilland, who look exactly alike. And also in this like the male sort of investigation of the female psyche to try and figure out this whole idea that there is one of them who would be capable of murder versus the other who wouldn't be capable of it at all.
I love the tagline for this movie. Twins, one who loves to kill.
That is a great tagline. Thankfully, the film is much more nuanced than that, I think. But yeah, and it's particularly entertaining because the cop who's investigating them is sitting there going like, I know the one of you did it. I know the one of you did it, and I don't fucking know which one. And they're just like, yeah. So what you gonna do?
Man, well, that one also is not available, so I'm gonna have to be on the lookout for it.
It is available on YouTube. You can watch it on
okay.
YouTube. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the one drawback to Just Watch is it doesn't say those. So.
Yeah, I mean it's it's a little gray market kind of thing, but that is currently on YouTube. So.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, any other final noir recommendations or anything related to this subject or just in general?
No, I think that when it comes to genre noir, it's the more noir films I've watched, actually, the more I've been like, it's a lot more nuanced than I think particularly the representations of the femme fatale or the good girl or things like that. You've got these really interesting tropes that are then subverted, and that's something that happens a lot in noir. It's like they establish these tropes and then they're like, but we're gonna fake you out with them. It's the femme fatale is less fatale than you think, or the good girl is not quite as good as you think she is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what about you? Any final recommendations?
I am just gonna say that I'm really looking forward to diving more into that Fox Noir collection on Criterion because there's a bunch in there that I haven't seen. So I don't have a recommendation, but just join me in this endeavor because it looks like it's going to be fun. So, yeah.
Definitely check out Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Okay, yeah, that was one that I actually threw into my saved list because that looked really good.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's sort of a counterpoint to Lara.
Cool. Which I think is also in there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Have you seen Lara?
I have, but it was a long time ago.
Okay.
I haven't watched it recently, so I'm gonna watch that one again too. And so awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Noirvember and for Ghostbusters and all the other things that we've talked about this month. December is kind of a funny month just because of all the because of the holidays and what that does for our recording schedule and stuff. So we're not sure exactly what December is going to look like yet. I know we've been promising it, but we will be doing some like fun stuff with our patrons in December. And we have something really exciting that we're working on doing this week. So if our website starts running a little weird for a day or two, just know that we are aware and it's part of the plan. So, but we're really excited because some big stuff is happening. So, so just a little bit of patience while we're dusting off some cobwebs and fixing some stuff up. It's going to be good. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like I said, we're going to have some stuff for patrons. And if you would like to make sure to join our patrons and be able to participate, you can go to patreon.com/citizendame. And then you can be counted among our awesome crew. We've got Adriana, Ali, Connor, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Mason, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Tao, and Will. And if you don't want to be a patron, but you want to support the show still, you can go to co-fi.com/citizendame and help us out that way. We do have our Zazzle store. Part of the changes that are coming this month also will involve the Zazzle store. So, but you can still go in there and look around. There's nothing new there right now, but that will be changing. So zazzle.com/citizendamepod. And of course, you can go to our website, citizendamepod.com, where we do have reviews of stuff. My licorice pizza review is there. I have I've got a few AFI reviews that I'm still working on finishing up. Lauren has some good stuff there too, and a couple of things I think that are coming as well.
Yeah, I got a few Blu-ray reviews and hopefully a few more like new release reviews.
Perfect. So make sure to go to our website and see all the good stuff that's coming our way or coming your way there. If you would like to, you can email us, citizendamepod@gmail.com. And of course, we're on the social medias. Twitter and Instagram, we're at Citizen Dame Pod, and Letterboxd, we are at Citizen Dame. We've got a great list of noir stuff, and we'll be adding to that as well. You can also find us individually. Lauren, where are you?
I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at LH Business.
And I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Karen M. Peterson. So thanks so much, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
May I use your phone, Mr. Marlowe? Hello? Police headquarters, please. Hello, this is Mrs.
Hello, what do you want, please? What? I called you. Say, who is this? Sergeant Riley? Well, there isn't any Sergeant Riley here. Wait a minute, you better talk to my mother.
Hello, who's this? The police? Well, this isn't a police station. Well, if you know it, then why did you... Look, this is not a police station. What was that you said? Oh, my father should hear this.
Hello, who is this? Yeah, but she just told you that... Oh, you're the police. Oh, he's the police. Oh, well, that's different. What can I do for you? I can do what? Where? Oh, no, I wouldn't like that. Neither would my daughter. I hope the sergeant never traces that call.
You like to play games, don't you?
Mm-hmm.